This night was no different from any other. I arrived at the warehouse, checked in with my manager, who locked up the place and left me to my usual tasks. I work the graveyard shift at a local shipping warehouse, and the majority of my job is counting inventory, making sure that all shipments and items are accounted for and tracked through the entire organizing process. Occasionally, I'll have a coworker on the same shift as me, but usually it's just me. Shipments that arrived during the day as I worked, and approximately an hour into my shift, I noticed a door on the back of the building that was cracked open, as if it had been closed but had not been locked into the doorway, causing it to protrude slightly. I opened the door and saw a quiet, empty lot behind the warehouse, with nothing particularly noteworthy to see. I assumed my manager had simply forgotten to lock the door. I closed it behind me and returned to counting inventory. I was working fairly quickly, finishing a respectable amount and reaching the next aisle of shelves when, out of the corner of my eye, it appeared that something had moved at the far end of the hallway. I looked up right away, but nothing was there. I couldn't lock it or anything because I didn't have the key to any of these side access doors. What I saw again was someone running across the hallway opening back there. I assumed it was some strange trick my mind was playing on me, but it still made my heart race for a second. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes, wondering what was wrong. I considered checking on it, but at first I decided against it because it would slow down my workflow to walk all the way down there, and I was 99% certain it was nothing like this happening all the time. As the minutes went by, I couldn't get rid of the slight suspicion that it might have been someone. I sighed, a little disappointed in myself for being so unnerved by this. I went down to the end of the hallway, a section I never really visit because it has nothing to do with my job, it's just a bunch of shelves full of large pallets already. Since I don't work in the warehouse, I prepared to be shipped out of it. With most of the lights off, I stood in the hallway and stared into the large, dark room for a few seconds, hoping to see if anything moved. When nothing did, I left the hallway and resumed my work in the same location. I'm not sure if it was because of that little incident, but it felt like I had just been hit by a wave of exhaustion. I was exhausted and didn't want to work as quickly as I had been a few minutes earlier. Prior to all of this, I wanted to finish this aisle before taking a break, so I continued working. However, only 5 minutes later, I was startled by something in the corner of my eye once more. I swear it looked like a figure or someone leaning out from a corner, watching me, but this time there was nothing there, so I dropped what I was doing and rushed to the end of the hallway once more, even though it was dark and I didn't see anything at all. I called out, not really expecting a response, but thought it was worth a try. "Hello." I waited for a few seconds before moving on into the room. It was very quiet, and every step I took reverberated throughout the warehouse. I stopped about halfway through and looked around, and as I stood there, I had the most unnerving and unsettling feeling that I was being watched. And being unable to see anything only made it worse, so I quickly made my way back to the other end of the hallway before turning around again because the darkness in that room made me shiver. I was about to leave to return to work when a loud thud sounded throughout the warehouse, sounding like someone pounding metal against one of the big shelving units. There were then a few seconds of silence that were only broken by the faint echoes that had been echoing through the room before were followed by a quieter thud, this time a repeated tapping against the metal shelf. It seemed as though they were trying to draw my attention so that I would return to the dark room, but I was so horrified that I fled, running to the back door and out into the parking lot. After getting a safe distance, I called for assistance, and I didn't really expect much from the police, at least not immediately. Unexpectedly, when they entered, they discovered a man in his 40s hiding behind one of the big shelves in the dimly lit room. He had a very unkempt and eerie appearance, but what was even more unsettling was that, when they looked at the security footage, they discovered that he had been wandering around the building's exterior multiple times over the previous week, checking all the doors to make sure they were unlocked. On these occasions, I was by myself in the warehouse, sometimes just on I don't know if they ever really figured out what he was trying to do, but the thought of him trying to entice me into the room still makes me feel really uneasy. I saw him get dragged out of the warehouse and into the police car, but that was the other side of the door from him. Story 2 by M. I worked part-time nighttime shifts at my parents' 24/7 when I was in college. Although this was a Friday, the only day I worked a full overnight shift starting at 10 p.m., I still thought it was better to work at a place my parents owned than anywhere else. The laundromat was just a dingy place on the outskirts of town. The building I had always found surprisingly creepy for what it was, something about the place being really old and the machines constantly humming in the background was just unsettling. To 6 a.m. After taking over from my dad, who left me some snacks in the back room and instructed me to call and wake him if I needed anything, I stayed behind the counter to make sure everything went smoothly. By midnight, everyone had left and all the machines were empty, so I waited behind the counter for another 15 minutes, just sitting on my phone. I was waiting a little while longer before starting any cleaning chores when a customer entered. I looked up and was a little perplexed because he had nothing with him, no clothes or laundry of any kind, a thick hoodie with the hood over his head, and his hands in his pockets. I said hello, but he didn't return my glance or say anything. He simply entered, moved slowly through the aisles of washers and dryers, and seemed to be looking around before returning to the entrance and leaving the doors open. It's not often that someone enters a laundromat in the middle of the night without a reason and just wanders around, so I couldn't help but watch him as he left and walked out into the parking lot. He didn't get into a car or anything, he just crossed the street and disappeared. I suppose he didn't technically do anything wrong. But I felt really strange about it, and being by myself most definitely didn't help. I believe that if there had been other patrons inside, would have felt safer and perhaps even gone unnoticed. Anything with nothing to do about it, though, so I just started cleaning. The only explanation for the man entering and moving around was that he might have been searching for a piece of clothing he had dropped earlier in the day, but that was a stretch given that the obvious course of action would have been to ask me if I had seen it. That was pretty much all I could think about for the next 20 or so minutes as I walked around, cleared off all the counters, and tidied up at one point, though, I happened to glance up from what I was doing and saw that guy from earlier standing directly outside the entrance. He was dressed entirely in black, so I almost didn't recognize him because it was dark outside, but by the time I did, he had already begun to leave. How long had he been watching me for? After a few moments, I approached the door and positioned myself as close as I could to gaze down the storefront, but the guy had already left, and I couldn't even tell where he went. There was something uncanny about the way he appeared, and it didn't make me feel at all at ease. I considered calling my dad, but I would have felt terrible waking him up and having him cover my shift because of a guy I thought was a little suspicious. I knew my dad wouldn't be upset about it, but I was still in my first few months of employment. I wanted to show that I was trustworthy, so I spent the next hour essentially sitting behind the counter and staring out the front windows. However, as more and more time went by and no customers were entering at all, I gradually began to pay less attention. I spent some time on my phone, trying to kill time, until I heard a few brief creak noises coming from the back of the building, so I got up and moved a few steps toward I heard what sounded like shuffling and someone moving things in one of the back rooms, but I only listened for a few seconds before realizing that someone was back there and that I had to leave. I turned and walked quietly to the front door, ready to call the police, and pushed on it to leave, but the door got stuck and wouldn't open. I looked down and saw through the glass that something was around the handles on the outside of the door, and I knew right away that there was only one back exit door, so I started very quietly moving toward the back room. I could still hear them moving things there, but they were moving them carefully, as if they were trying to be quiet about it. When I reached the doorway and looked inside, I saw the man standing by the door, watching me, and my entire body was filled with panic. He was looking through some of the boxes with his back to me. When I saw the exit, I thought, this is my chance. I ran for the door, and the man turned around as soon as he saw me. My heart sank for a second when I reached the door because there was a makeshift rope tied around the handle, as if he was attempting to tie it shut. Fortunately, whatever he did didn't work, and I managed to force it open and flee. As soon as I left the building, the man emerged as well, but he didn't pursue me. Instead, he simply made a run, for it was evident that the man was trying to trap me inside with him when my dad and the police arrived. But there weren't many leads on where he could have gone. I assume he was trying to do it covertly, but I had to search around for something to help tie down the back exit door, which finally allowed me to escape. His intentions were probably terrible, and now that I'm going back in time, it feels absurd that I didn't realize anything was seriously wrong until the very last minute. At least now I'm 1,000 times story 3, by anonymous. For a few years, I worked as a data entry clerk for a private company. It was your average low-tier job that wasn't very well respected at the workplace, and the managers kept adding on more and more work that I wasn't even supposed to be doing under the data. This made me more cautious when I'm working alone and never trust anyone to be truly harmless, because I know that if that man was successful in locking that back door, there would have been no escape for me. The office was on the 5th and top floor of a large office building in a small business center located in the suburbs just outside of the city. Our company only had the 5th floor, the other floors were rented out to various businesses. As far as I knew, all of these other businesses were service-based, so their offices would empty out by 5 or 6 every night. However, I was young and this was my first real job, so I just went with it. I was frequently the one to stay late on some nights with whatever busy work needed to be done because I made the least money at the company. This night, my boss gave me a lot of stuff to do and didn't even ask if I could stay late because he assumed I was good for it and I was the pushover I was at the time. This included having people work later as the data entry clerk and essentially doing every other odd job as well. After 30 minutes, the building's main lights went out, leaving only the low power saving lights on. I sat at the computer, going through the motions and working at a comfortable pace for me for about 3 full hours. With the extra money always helped, and with the office empty, I actually enjoyed the work better because I wasn't under the stress of being watched and micromanaged all day. At 6 o'clock, everyone else started leaving for home, but I stayed to continue working. I was working in a dark, quiet building when all of a sudden I heard something below me. Obviously, because of the size of the building and all of the rooms inside, the sound was very muffled and echoey, but I thought it sounded like a door opening or closing. I looked up from my computer for a few seconds to try to figure out what it might be, but I didn't hear anything else, so I just went back to work without giving it much thought. The sound I heard was probably a door, and it was probably just the building settling and creaking. I didn't hear anything else to make me think about it further, so after about 30 to 45 minutes, I think I had completed almost all of the work I needed to do. I believe I only had an hour or so left to do before I could go home, but it was getting late into the night, and I felt my eyes getting sleepy, so I got up to get a small cup of started brewing coffee from the Keurig that was located near the office entrance. I'm not sure how I missed it during the entire walk up to the coffee station, but as I returned to my desk with my coffee in hand, I noticed that the hallway door, the one in the back of the room that led to only the utility closet and the staircase that descends to the other floors, was open. Since hardly anyone uses it, I was curious, so I went to the doorway and just stuck my head out to look around. I noticed that the closet door and the staircase door were both closed and there were no signs of anything there, but I did get a chill and a sort of uneasy feeling. I assumed that was just due to the dim lighting in that hallway, but at night it was dark and a little eerie. I went up to the staircase door and I went through it just to make sure, then I went back into the room and shut the door behind me before returning to my desk. I only had an hour of work left, so if I could finish it and leave, then I wouldn't have to worry about anything. The door being open was really odd, though, and I knew that nobody should be coming up here or would have come up here and said nothing, so I tried to keep working. I tried my best to finish it quickly, but it was difficult because every few minutes I would get the unsettling feeling that I was being watched. I would raise my head from the screen and look around, but nothing was there. This started to bother me because I knew it was making it harder for me to focus and make things take longer, but at the same time, the feeling was so strong that I couldn't help but look up every time. This continued for 30 minutes, but all around me went dark. I instantly swung my head toward the other side of the room, where I knew the light switches were standing up to hurry over there, but I stopped before I could even take a step because in the quiet of the building, I could hear the soft, slow footsteps of someone walking from that direction. All the dim overhead lights abruptly went out, leaving only the pale white computer screen to illuminate the area around me. I listened in horror for a few seconds as the other person approached me from the shadows beyond the computer screen's illumination. Then, my adrenaline shot through me, and I bolted from my desk and headed straight for the staircase door. I made it to the hallway and into the staircase, where there was finally some light. I didn't stop running until I reached the first floor and left the building, where I obviously called 911. It took 2 days to obtain the security footage, and it wasn't very helpful anyhow. The building was old, and the 30-year-old security system was in black and white, and it was pixelated and blurry too much, so all they knew to see was the person. They waited for almost 15 minutes before an officer arrived, and then another 5 minutes for 2 more officers before they finally searched the building and discovered no one inside. It's unclear what he was trying to do or what he wanted at that point. Perhaps he was just trying to scare me out of the office, or perhaps he had a more sinister intention without any real conclusion. He entered the building at around 2 p.m. and said he had an appointment with one of the other companies. He then pretty much immediately hid in the utility closet until everyone had left except for me. He walked around for a while until he noticed I was still there. Even though I'm pleased I departed later for many reasons, one of the main ones was to avoid being alone in that building following the incident, especially since he still has never located